Welcome to Authentic Podcast number 3. I'm Scott Austin, CEO of Authentic Artists. I'm joined once again by the tireless, fearless Bob Bradley.
Scott, how you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. I'm sipping a Gentleman Jack, which is a, it's a fine whiskey. Actually, I don't know how fine it is, but it tastes just fine to me. Terrible.
Hey, you can't go wrong with that.
You can't. Before we get into the important stuff, I want to talk about the celebrity sightings we've had this week. Not that unusual in LA to see a celebrity or run into a celebrity, but it's a bit unusual when it happens a block from the office here, which is in North Hollywood. Not a typical hangout for celebs. So I was coming back from a lunch meeting, and I see a bright pink Bentley. And there's only one of those that I know of, and it belongs to Miss Paris Hilton.
Who's that?
So I knew, obviously, whose car it was, and I was just wondering, what's she doing in North Hollywood? And I think that she may have gotten a flat. She has these big 24-inch, wagon wheel rims, and she might have hit a pothole.
Maybe she was on her way over here to get a record deal.
Well, agree to disagree on that one. So follow that up with, who did we see last night? We went to happy hour with our friends from Bunim Murray.
We saw Rainn Wilson.
Rainn Wilson. I don't know who he is. Is it a he or she?
He's Dwight from The Office.
Ah, okay.
That guy he's like the right-hand man of the main guy.
Steve Carell.
Steve Carell.
I don't watch the show. I know it's Steve's show.
Yeah, I mean, the show's huge, but he's kind of the instigator, buddy, rats on everybody in the office, and everybody loves to hate him, but he's a cool actor.
All right, well, we saw him last night at happy hour, so it's good to know we're not the only ones who are cheap and like to go get, discounted cocktails and nachos. And then today at lunch, I had a lunch meeting with one of my business partners, and lo and behold, Meryl Streep.
Ooh.
She looks great.
Well, that's good.
She looks incredible.
Times treated her well.
She is one of the best actresses alive, and she looks good to boot. She's really a win-win.
Should get her for one of our music videos.
Great idea.
So, Scott, today I thought we would talk a little bit about making records independently.
I love the topic. It seems that everybody has a Pro Tools rig. Everybody has GarageBand. They're making records in their bedrooms or their basements, and they're yielding excellent product.
Absolutely. And there's a stigma that comes with a lot of artists where the fans are like, oh, this kid just made it in his bedroom, but that's the truth. A lot of people are doing pre-production and creating great content, on a budget.
Absolutely. And, for guys like me who overestimated the importance of having a particular producer involved or a particular mixer involved, not that it's not an amazing thing to have, a super talented guy at the helm, but the reality is that at least on a sonic level, the stuff that we hear at Authentic on a weekly basis, all of these records that we get sent to us, they sound fucking great to me. I mean, maybe I'm used to hearing Pro Tools music or something and it all sounds the same, but I think it all sounds pretty good. I mean, very rarely do we get something that just outright sucks. So I guess that begs the question, does a young band need a producer or mixer?
Not at first. They have to worry about writing their songs, and there's enough tools out there where they can go and record that themselves. And then when they're ready to work with, a certain producer, if they have the funding, if they can get a loan, borrow money from their parents, then yeah, like if they have good songs, they'll go in and they'll record it with a good producer that will work on a budget.
Absolutely correct. And, any high-level producer mixer, they're going to want to hear your songs in some sort of recorded form before they take the job anyway. So I think you're dead on. Look, I've worked with some of the biggest names in the business on all sides. Everyone from your Glenn Ballards to your Chris and Tom Lord Alges to, Jack Joseph Puig, Mark Endert, all of the greats. And these people are experts in their field. Mark Needham, board member of Authentic, one of my closest friends, one of the greatest mixers on the planet. These guys have years and years and years of experience. They've heard it all. They've solved every problem. Now what they do is they just kick ass at what they do. They make their shit sound amazing. But the problem is, a lot of times these guys are handed records without any great songs on them, right? So they can make them sound amazing, but there's not really anything there. So, I think that it's important for a young artist who can't, afford the top guys to make sure that they're doing their own kind of A&R, that they're having their fellow friends and other bands listen to their stuff, or, really keeping an open mind and ear to people's comments on their music.
It's almost that a lot of bands would be rushing into the big, expensive product too soon.
Yeah, exactly. It's with anything else. It's steps. It's baby steps. It's learning. It's evolution. It's figuring out what works and not jumping in head first. Bob, you've been in a bunch of bands. You've been signed to a pretty big indie label, and I'm sure you had a little bit of a budget for a producer and an engineer and all that good stuff. What was your experience with making records on your own?
Well, when we first started, this was like 2000, when we went into a studio, and obviously Pro Tools wasn't used then, and there wasn't a lot of tricks that people can do independently now. But, we coughed up about $1,000 collectively as a band, save your money, and we went in and worked with a smaller studio. And these days, even when I started bands later on before I was working with you, we did a lot of stuff on our own. We spent a little bit of money to get at-home recording equipment, and we made some killer demos, some killer stuff we even sold online. But on the label side, when we went into bigger studios, you had to be ready regardless. When we went in with, say, we worked with Matt Bales out of Seattle, he expected demos from us that were really good quality, that he could interpret the song structure, what our guitar tones are like, what the vocal patterns would eventually kind of turn into. And without that, he would have a harder time recording a band. So I think it's really important that bands work on, writing music, of course, structure, pre-production, understanding audio quality, tones. The list could go on, but it's really perfecting things on your own as much as possible before spending any money in a studio. Exactly. I mean, the studio is not the place to write lyrics in. I can't tell you how many situations I've been in where, I worked with a band that I hadn't worked with before, and we get in there and it comes time to cut vocals, and the singer's standing there in his boxer shorts and in the dark, you scribbling on a scratch pad trying to figure out what the words are. And this is a business, this is your business, and it's critical that you approach everything with a sense of efficiency and a sense of attention to detail and quality, and really making sure you're putting your best effort out there. Yeah, you don't want to waste the producer's time. And you don't want to waste money, more importantly, because I can't tell you how expensive it gets when you don't have those lyrics written. That studio time doesn't just get written off. That clock is ticking pretty much 24/7 over there. Yeah, and you could be in a studio for anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day. Sometimes it's 1,000 plus a day to go and record a killer record, not including mixing and mastering and going back and making fixes. All of that adds up, and you want to use your money wisely. Let's talk about mixes. Mixes are something that I am a very strong proponent of, having great mixes, because you can have really cool production, but if it just is all washy sounding and it sounds like a mess, then you're going to have a hard time getting your audience to embrace it. And I think that people don't even know the subtle differences, the subtleties that are involved in mixing, but a great mix is, in my opinion anyway, almost more important than elaborate production. I would much rather hear simpler elements put together really clean than a bunch of really cool noodling that just sounds like a wall of sound. Right, and I think personally the mix is more important than the actual production. It makes all the difference, and I think with listeners, people that notice that the bass, it's just really kicks, and the kick drum and the drums just sound huge. That makes a difference for a record. So one of my favorite producers of all time is Howard Benson. And I know he's very commercial, but every record he's ever made has sounded huge. And when he put something out there, I was excited to listen to what it sounded like and how it sounded on my system, in my car and at home. And it was an experience. And I think a lot of music fans appreciate a killer mix. Howard, obviously, being on the production end, can clearly get the best tracks out of a band. And then he hands it over to Chris Lord-Alge, who's arguably one of the world's best engineers, makes great sounding records. I made a Family Force 5 record with him, as well as a couple of others, and he's just a great guy and super talented dude. So, I think that what we're saying is that, bands put a lot of importance a lot of times on the wrong things. We've talked about this in our other podcasts. We're probably going to talk about it 100 more times. But when it comes to Sonics, I think that you guys should be empowered and excited to make your own records, to learn and understand the basics of recording. I took a class at Orange Coast College in Orange County, California, on recording when I was just getting started many, many moons ago. And it really taught me a lot about what sound is and what a microphone does. And it's not just as simple as fiddling with some knobs. There's some real science that goes into audio engineering and learning how to, really
make the best recording you can. So anyway, I think maybe we're done with this topic and we can move on, but I thought it was kind of interesting because we do hear a lot of new music here. Most of it is self-produced. The best stuff I think that we've received, ultimately there was some professional help involved at some level, and clearly I think that if an artist can, at some point in their career, they should try to work with a really great producer or mixer.
Yeah, whether they produce it themselves or they pay somebody, it's just important to know how it works, the difference between a producer and a mixer and how they work together.
Let's talk about mastering. This is a topic that not a whole lot of people actually know much about. They've heard about it, and I think most people feel like they can just slam their mixes through an L2 plugin and that's mastering because it sounds loud. And I think that when you hear the difference between a professionally mastered product, Eric Broyhill is a guy that we at Authentik use quite a bit. Leon Zervas, who recently left Sterling Sound and is now at a company in Australia. These guys are the go-to guys for us. I've worked with all the mastering engineers at one time or another, it seems, and they're all incredibly talented. But these two guys in particular, I really just respect and appreciate what they can get out of a recording. There's a body and a warmth that, you know, if you're just slamming something really hard through a limiter, you don't really get those subtleties, and it sounds less like a professional record to me when you're just, you know, kind of doing those amateur level moves.
Right. Maybe you can explain just a little bit, because even as an artist, when I was touring and doing records, you know, my perception of what mastering was is just making it sound big enough to go on a stereo and match other records that were out there. I would always be comparing, you know, I was in a hard rock band. We'd bring in a Deftones record and a Chevelle record and just make sure it sounds as big as those. But I don't think a lot of people understand really what mastering is.
You bring up an excellent point, and, you know, I'll take it a step further. I don't think most people actually really understand what a producer and a mixer is either. So maybe we should take 35 seconds or 3.5 minutes probably to talk about that. A producer is the guy that essentially, you know, you sit down with in some sort of pre-production way, you play your songs for them, and they help you really make sure that the arrangements are right, that the chord progressions really work and fit. They're basically almost like what a director is to a movie, right? They're basically helping you piece together the sound of the song and sound of the record and helping to give you input. A mixer is someone who, after the record's tracked, takes those tracks and puts them together. So the kick drum is at a certain level, the bass guitar is at a certain level. He makes it all work. He makes it all sound really punchy and clean. Every instrument has their place, sounds awesome. Big, big, big difference with a good mix. Mastering, I think, again, gets confused a lot. People say, oh, well, it's mastered, it was mixed, and not necessarily the case. Generally, most mix engineers, at least professional mix engineers, they don't add in those crazy, hot, loud plugins because it can really deteriorate the sound pretty quickly. What they'll do is they'll print what's called a board level mix, which is a 0 dB mix, or sometimes even a -3 or -6 dB mix, which is pretty quiet. The reason they do that is they know that a mastering guy who has $500,000 in killer gear is going to get a better final sounding product. So basically what a mastering guy is, he takes the mix, right, which you had your producer record the tracks, the mixer put them all together, mixed them, then he takes those final 2 tracks, that final mix, and runs it through some kick-ass gear, some state-of-the-art mastering gear. He'll tweak the levels, he'll tweak the EQ, maybe the mixes, maybe the bass was a little too loud, the bottom end was a little too loud, so he can do his best to kind of suck some of that out, or he can add things if it needs a little air, a little top end, mix sound a little brighter and cleaner. So basically that's what he does, and he balances the songs song to song on a record. He matches the levels so that when you're listening to a record, if you have bought any commercial record in the past 50 years, you've probably noticed that relatively the songs sound about the same level from track to track. You don't have like one that's super quiet and one that gets, oh my god, it's blowing the speakers out. That's the essence of what mastering is, and I'm sure there's some techie audiophile guys that would like me to get more geeky about it and really kind of get into. There is more to it than that, but that's the basics. It's level, it's EQ, it's solving some problems. Although in my career and anyone's who's been in the music business, you've often heard we'll fix it in mastering, we'll fix it in the mix. generally, my advice to anyone listening to this that is making their own records is don't wait to fix it later. If it's something that is a problem, it's going to be more of a problem later on and harder to fix, because once you mix a song and you take those 48 tracks and make them 2, it's very difficult to solve one little problem. Like with, if a hi-hat's too loud, there isn't really a whole lot you can do without completely destroying the mix. So mastering, incredibly important. I don't think it's as important as maybe it used to be, and no disrespect to our friends Eric and Leon and everyone else in the business, but the reality is that you can do a pretty good job on your own without a huge budget. If you have a little bit of a budget, call one of the guys I mentioned and they'll take care of you. Tell them I sent you. Okay, so we covered recording, we covered mixing, I think a little bit. Hopefully you guys have a little bit of a better understanding of what, people are looking for out there. The days of demos, that term I don't believe applies anymore. I think that any recording, why treat it as a demo? Treat it as a full recording. It may not sound as good as the Linkin Park record, but it's okay. It's still going to sound better than what we used to be able to accomplish on 4-track cassette recorders, which was my first recording apparatus of choice. All right, so we've covered this today, I think, pretty good. Hopefully everybody got some good information. Next week or in the next few weeks, I know we have a holiday coming up, I'd like to bring in Ryan Hudson, who's actually in a band called Overbreaker that's signed to Authentik. Ryan is pretty much one of the most knowledgeable guys I've ever met when it comes to gear. He's a manager at Guitar Center, and he is just a guy who gets it. He knows everything there is to know. So what do you think, Bob? Good guest?
Absolutely. Let's bring him in.
We'll get him in here, and in the meantime, we're going to get back to Gentleman Jack. We're going to enjoy the rest of this beautiful fall day, and we'll see you next week.